Welcome to Veiled Narrative Stories, where emotions breathe, hearts collide, and untold tales of love and loss come alive. Today we bring you a story of power, pain, and passion. Ethan Drake was a name that echoed across continents. The billionaire who turned dust into gold, a man who commanded power with silence and built his empire from nothing but ruthless ambition. His world was made of marble, glass, and control. Love to him was just another transaction, a deal that could be signed, sealed, and broken without emotion. Until Lena walked into his life. She wasn't from his world, a woman who had nothing, no wealth, no status, no safety net, just courage, compassion, and a spark that refused to die. She worked as a caretaker at one of Ethan's private rehabilitation centers, a quiet soul who mended broken people while silently nursing her own scars. Their first meeting wasn't magical, it was inconvenient. Ethan came there unannounced to inspect his facility. Lena, in her simple white uniform, didn't recognize him. When she refused to bend to his arrogance, he was startled. No one had ever looked him in the eyes and said, "No." That moment, something cracked open in him. Days turned into encounters, and encounters turned into connection. Ethan found excuses to visit again, sometimes to check reports, sometimes to see improvements, but truthfully, he just wanted to hear her laugh. In Lena's world of warmth and honesty, he found what his empire could never buy: peace. But love between two different worlds is never simple. When the media found out that the billionaire was falling for a woman with no name, no title, and no wealth, storms erupted. Board members warned him, investors threatened him, and his closest allies betrayed him. Ethan was forced to choose: the empire he built with his mind, or the woman who rebuilt his soul. And in that choice, he lost everything that could be measured, but gained everything that could be felt. Years later, people still whispered his story. How the billionaire who owned the world gave it all away for a single heartbeat that felt like home. The morning sun spilled like molten gold over the skyline of New York City, a city that never stopped moving, never stopped chasing, and in the tallest tower that touched the clouds sat Ethan Drake, the man everyone wanted to be and no one truly knew. Every newspaper headline called him the Empire Architect, a man whose hands built corporations from dreams and crushed rivals with the same precision. His world was silence, the kind only power could afford. From the polished black marble of his penthouse floors to the rare art hanging on his walls, everything around him screamed perfection and emptiness. He had conquered everything, except peace. Ethan's day began not with joy, but with command. Assistants hurried in with tablets, analysts waited with charts, and his secretary read out figures worth millions. Every voice trembled in his presence, every eye waited for his approval. He was not a man, he was a storm that people learned to survive. But beneath that steel gaze lay exhaustion, not of body but of soul. That morning, his physician had insisted he take a break. "You can't keep doing this, Ethan," the doctor said, sliding a file across his glass desk. "Your blood pressure's a warning sign. Rest, even for a week." Reluctantly, Ethan agreed. He didn't go to a resort or private island. Instead, he went to one of his own investments, Drake Rehabilitation Center, a quiet facility in the countryside designed for veterans and trauma patients. He owned it but had never stepped foot inside. He arrived unannounced, no cameras, no PR team, just the man behind the empire. As his car stopped by the tall iron gates, he noticed the simplicity of the place. Birds sang, trees swayed, and laughter drifted faintly from a garden where patients walked freely. It was the kind of peace he hadn't seen in decades, the kind that money couldn't design. Inside, nurses greeted him nervously, not recognizing who he was until he introduced himself with that cold, polished voice. "I'm Ethan Drake. I own this facility." The room froze. Managers rushed in, trying to impress him with reports, statistics, and glossy brochures. But as they spoke, his eyes wandered, not to numbers but to her. She stood in the corner, adjusting flowers in a patient's vase. Her uniform was simple, her hair loosely tied, a few strands dancing against her cheek. There was nothing extraordinary about her at first glance, no diamonds, no designer clothes, yet she carried something rare: stillness. Her name was Lena. When their eyes met, Ethan felt something he couldn't name. She didn't look away, didn't bow like everyone else. She smiled faintly, a calm, knowing smile, then continued tending to her patient as though the most powerful man in the city hadn't just entered the room. It unsettled him. Later that day, while inspecting the facility, Ethan noticed her again. helping a patient who had lost his legs. She knelt beside the man holding his hand, her voice soft and patient. "You're not broken," she whispered to him. "You're just learning to be whole again." Ethan felt something twist inside him. He had spent his life commanding others. Yet here was a woman who ruled hearts without ever trying. When she finally turned to him, he asked sharply, "You speak to patients like that often?" She didn't flinch. "Only when they need to remember who they are." "And who reminds you?" he asked, his tone edged but curious. Lena smiled. "No one needs to. I already know." He was speechless. No one had ever dared to speak to him like that. She didn't seem impressed by his wealth, nor afraid of his authority. She treated him like a man, not a title. That night, in the quiet of his penthouse suite, her words echoed in his mind. "I already know who I am." It was a sentence that struck deeper than he expected. Ethan had everything the world desired, but in truth, he no longer knew who he was. His name, his empire, his achievements, all glittered, yet none glowed. The next morning, he returned. Not as the owner, but as a visitor. Watching her from afar, he saw how she treated everyone the same. The poor, the broken, the forgotten, no judgment, no calculation, just heart. And in her quiet strength, Ethan found something he had long buried: admiration. For the first time, he wanted to know someone not for what they could offer him, but for what they made him feel. In a world where everything had a price, Lena Carter was priceless. And though he didn't yet know it, this moment, this woman, this defiance of simplicity, would become the beginning of his greatest empire: love. The days that followed were unlike anything Ethan Drake had ever experienced. For the first time in years, he wasn't surrounded by the buzz of stock markets, the hum of private jets, or the cold glow of boardroom screens. Instead, he woke up to the scent of pine and rain, to the gentle hum of nature replacing the noise of ambition. Yet something else stirred him awake every morning: a quiet, impossible curiosity about the woman who had unknowingly shaken his world. Lena Carter. She had no wealth, no fame, and no desire for either. But she carried an invisible power, the kind that couldn't be built, bought, or sold. Her world was small, yet infinite. Every life she touched became softer, lighter, healed. Ethan watched her work with the patients day after day. How she laughed with them. How she listened like every word mattered. How her hands seemed to mend what doctors couldn't. It was strange for him to be moved by simplicity. He had been surrounded by models, celebrities, and powerful women, all drawn to his money, all easily impressed by the glitter of his name. But Lena, she didn't care for any of it. When he tried to offer her help, better tools for her job, a bonus, even a new department, she politely refused. "I don't need more things, Mr. Drake," she said softly. "I just need time. Healing takes time, not money." That sentence hit him harder than a deal gone wrong. No one had ever spoken to him like that. No one had ever dared remind him that not everything bowed before wealth. Ethan began visiting the rehabilitation center every morning under the pretense of reviewing operations. But Lena saw through it. One afternoon, as he stood watching her help a young boy relearn how to walk, she looked up and said with a teasing smile, "You don't really care about operations, do you?" He froze, caught off guard. "What makes you say that?" "Because you've been standing there for an hour, and the reports you're holding are upside down." For a moment, the great Ethan Drake, the man who negotiated billion-dollar mergers, was speechless. Then, for the first time in years, he laughed. A real laugh. One that came not from pride or power, but from pure, unguarded joy. And that laughter, her laughter, became a melody that lingered long after he left. As days passed, their worlds began to quietly blend. He would find excuses to walk beside her, carrying boxes or helping clean, though his hands were more used to holding pens than mops. She teased him gently, calling him Mr. Fancy Hands. One evening, the sky turned gold as they stood near the garden. A patient had painted a small canvas and offered it to Lena, a portrait of sunlight breaking through clouds. Ethan watched as she knelt to thank him, her eyes shining. He asked her, "How do you stay so hopeful, even after seeing so much pain?" She looked up at the sky. "Because pain reminds us we're alive, and as long as we're alive, we can heal. Even the richest heart needs healing sometimes." Her words sank into him like rain on dry soil. For the first time, Ethan saw his wealth for what it was: armor. He had built walls of gold around his pain, believing success could silence loneliness. But Lena was proof that healing wasn't found in control, it was found in surrender. That night, he couldn't sleep. The city lights shimmered outside his window, but his thoughts were filled with her. Her calm, her fire, her simplicity. He realized that in all his years of conquering the world, he had never truly seen it. But when Lena smiled, he saw life again. Raw, unpolished, and breathtakingly human. A few days later he arrived with something small. A single white lily wrapped in paper. No logos, no diamonds, just a flower. She raised an eyebrow as he handed it to her. "What's this?" Thank you," he said quietly, "for reminding me that there's beauty in stillness." "You think a flower can repay a lesson like that?" she asked with a gentle laugh. "No," he admitted, smiling faintly. "But it's a start. And that was the beginning, not of a grand gesture, not of luxury or passion, but of something pure." Days turned into evenings shared over tea in the garden. He listened to her stories, of her struggles, her dreams, her quiet victories. He told her, for the first time, about his mother's passing, about the loneliness behind his success. She didn't pity him, she simply listened, the way no one ever had. That was Lena's gift. She didn't heal with medicine or miracles, she healed with presence. And for Ethan, who had lived in a world of noise, her silence was salvation. Under the vast sky one night, as stars shimmered above them, he whispered, "Lena, you could have anything in the world if you asked me." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Then I'll ask for nothing, so you'll learn to give without expecting." And in that moment, Ethan Drake, the man who measured everything by value, realized that the richest feeling in life is to love someone who asks for nothing but your heart. The rain fell softly that evening, a gentle rhythm against the windows of the Drake Rehabilitation Center. Ethan stood by the glass, watching the droplets race each other down the pane. Behind him, the fireplace glowed with quiet warmth, and in that flickering light, sat Lena, reading to a patient who had forgotten how to dream. She read with emotion, her voice delicate yet powerful, like a song that could heal even silence. Ethan found himself watching her more than listening to the story. Every word that left her lips seemed to stitch something inside him that had long been torn. He had built his empire with logic, precision, and dominance. But here in her presence those tools became useless. Love wasn't a calculation, it was surrender, and though he didn't say it aloud, he had already surrendered. Days turned into weeks, and whispers began to travel, first among the staff, then to the outside world. The billionaire and the caretaker, they called it. An unlikely pairing, a scandal waiting to unfold. Photographs began surfacing, of Ethan walking through the garden with Lena, smiling like a man reborn. For the first time in years he had stopped hiding behind his money. But the world wasn't kind to sincerity. The headlines came like knives. Ethan Drake's empire built on a love scandal. From boardroom to bedroom, the billionaire's fall. Who is Lena Carter? The woman who stole the billionaire's heart. Investors panicked. Board members called emergency meetings. His advisors begged him to deny it, to call her friend, to protect his image, but Ethan refused. "If I deny her," he told them, "I deny the only truth I've ever known." That night, Lena found him sitting alone in his study, the glow of the city below reflected in his tired eyes. He looked at her, the mask of confidence finally slipping away. "They're tearing you apart because of me," she whispered. He shook his head. "They're tearing me apart because they've never seen me human." She walked closer, kneeling beside his chair. "Ethan, you don't have to fight this battle for me." He reached out, touching her face. A gesture so gentle, it almost broke her. "You don't understand," he said softly. "I've fought all my life for everything that doesn't matter. For once, I want to fight for something that does." Tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to tell him to stop, to protect himself, his legacy. But her heart wouldn't let her. "You'll lose everything," she whispered. "Then I'll start again," he said. "As long as I don't lose you." The next day, he walked into the boardroom where a dozen men in tailored suits awaited him. They wanted him to step down to protect the company's image. Ethan stood tall, unshaken. "Gentlemen," he said, "for years, I've built this empire with one rule. Never let emotions interfere with business. And because of that rule, I became rich, but hollow. If my company can't survive the truth that I've found love, then maybe it's not worth keeping." Silence filled the room. They didn't understand, they couldn't. Power had made them blind. But Ethan was already free from that blindness. He walked away, not as a billionaire, but as a man finally living his truth. Meanwhile, Lena faced her own storms. Journalists camped outside her apartment, strangers whispered as she passed. Some called her a gold digger, others labeled her lucky. But she knew the truth, she hadn't taken anything from Ethan. In fact, she feared she might be taking his world apart. She decided to leave quietly, to protect him. One evening she went to the rehabilitation center for the last time, planning to say goodbye. But Ethan was already there, waiting. "You can't disappear," he said quietly. "Not like this. I'm not what your world wants, Ethan. I'll only make it harder for you." "Then let it be hard," he replied. "Because the world that doesn't want you, Lena, isn't a world I want to live in." He stepped closer, his hand trembling slightly as he cupped her face. "You said once that healing takes time. You were wrong," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Healing takes you." And before she could respond, he kissed her. Not the desperate kiss of a man trying to possess, but the sacred one of a man finally letting go of everything else. Outside, thunder rolled through the clouds, rain poured against the earth, but inside that quiet garden, time stood still. In the days that followed, Ethan withdrew from public life. He sold a division of his company, released millions into charities, and disappeared from the social spotlight. The media speculated, the world gossiped, but neither of them cared. They had chosen each other over everything else. Lena's world of healing and Ethan's world of power had finally merged into one, simple, honest, unbreakable. Years later, when people spoke of Ethan Drake, they didn't talk about his fortune or his empire. They spoke of the man who gave up everything for love, and somewhere far from the noise of the city, in a small cottage by the sea, the billionaire and the woman who had nothing walked hand in hand, proof that sometimes, the greatest rebellion in this world of wealth and noise is simply to love without price. The world has a way of testing the things we love most, and for Ethan Drake, the test came not as thunder or fire, but as silence. Weeks after his public stand for Lena, the empire he had built began to tremble. Stocks dropped, investors vanished, contracts evaporated like mist. The empire that once stood like iron began to crack, one piece at a time. For the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to hold on to the only thing that made him human. He sold his mansion first, the glass fortress that had once towered over the city like a monument to his power. The halls that once echoed with the sound of empty success now stood quiet, almost peaceful, as if relieved to finally let him go. Lena stood by him through it all. She didn't flinch when he told her about his financial losses. She didn't cry when the media mocked her again, calling her the curse of the empire. She simply looked at him, touched his hand, and said, "You can lose everything, Ethan, just don't lose yourself." He smiled faintly. "You are myself, Lena." They moved to a smaller home, a countryside cottage near the lake, where the air smelled of pine and freedom. Gone were the marble floors and designer suits. Ethan now wore soft shirts, open at the collar, his hair unpolished, his laughter real. In the mornings, he brewed coffee while Lena tended to the flowers outside. They spent hours reading, talking, walking barefoot through the grass. He was no longer Ethan Drake the billionaire. He was simply Ethan, a man rediscovering what peace truly felt like. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Ethan sat by the lake, skipping stones across the water. Lena joined him, her hair flowing with the evening breeze. "Do you miss it?" she asked softly. "What?" "Your old life." He paused, watching the stone disappear beneath the ripples. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Not the money, not the power, but the illusion of control. I spent years believing I was untouchable. Now I see. I was just untouched." She smiled gently. "You built your world with your mind, Ethan. But the heart, it needs something simpler." He turned to her, eyes soft with unspoken emotion. "And what does your heart need?" Lena looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Just this, you. This silence, this peace." He reached for her hand, holding it against his chest. "Then this is where I'll build again. Not empires of glass but moments of gold. But peace, like love, often comes with a price." A few months later, Ethan received a letter, a legal notice from the board. They accused him of breach of contract and emotional misconduct. In short, they wanted everything he still owned, his remaining shares, his last name's worth. Lena found him sitting in silence, the letter trembling in his hands. His jaw was tight, but his eyes were tired. "They can take it all," she said firmly. "It's not that simple, Lena," he whispered. "This company, it's my legacy." "No," she said, kneeling beside him. "We are your legacy. What you built was powerful, but what you've become, that's divine." Her words shattered the last wall around his heart. That night, he signed the papers. He gave it all away. Every share, every claim, every symbol of control. And in the quiet after, he felt something extraordinary: freedom. Weeks turned into months and the world forgot about Ethan Drake. The media moved on to new scandals, new billionaires, new headlines. But in a small lakeside cottage, a man who had lost everything was living like he had finally found the universe. Lena continued her work, tending to the sick, teaching children in the nearby village, spreading warmth wherever she went, and Ethan supported her quietly, learning the art of giving without expectation. They had nothing, yet they had everything. One night, the stars shimmered across the dark velvet of the sky. Ethan and Lena sat by the lake, wrapped in a blanket, the reflection of constellations dancing on the water. "Do you ever regret loving me?" he asked softly, almost afraid of her answer. She turned her head toward him, her eyes glistening. "Never. Love isn't something to regret, Ethan. It's something to protect, even if it costs everything." He smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then I guess we paid the price. And earned the reward," she whispered. "Peace." He kissed her forehead, pulling her close as the wind whispered through the trees. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, 1,000 diamonds floating on dark silk. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt rich. Not because of what he owned, but because of what he felt. The cost of his heart had been high, but the worth of her love was beyond measure. In the morning, as sunlight kissed the water and birds sang their quiet song, Ethan stood outside their small home, watching Lena water the garden. He smiled. The kind of smile that only comes from a heart finally at rest. The empire was gone. The power was gone. But in its place stood something far greater, a love that no fall could destroy. And as he walked toward her, whispering her name into the wind, the world seemed to pause, because some loves are so rare even time itself stands still to honor them. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest storms. And for Ethan Drake, the man who once ruled the skyline, life had become beautifully simple. Years had passed since he walked away from his empire. The city that once carried his name now belonged to others. Younger men chasing the same illusions he had once worshipped. But Ethan no longer belonged to that world. His new empire was smaller, quieter, infinite. It was the sound of Lena's laughter echoing through their cottage, the warmth of her hand fitting perfectly into his, the scent of morning coffee drifting through an open window overlooking the lake. He had lost everything, and in losing, had found everything that mattered. Their home was not built of marble or steel, but of peace. The walls were lined with books, flowers, and the small paintings Lena had collected from children she helped heal. The garden bloomed with life, roses, lilies, and lavender swaying under the breath of the wind. Every evening, they would sit by the lake as the sky melted from gold to violet, and Ethan would whisper stories, not of wealth, but of lessons learned in love. He often said, "Lena, I spent half my life building towers, but you taught me to build roots." And she would smile, resting her head on his shoulder. "Towers crumble, Ethan, but roots, they keep growing, even underground." One autumn morning, while the leaves fell like golden rain, Ethan received a letter from his old company. They had stabilized again, and his former partners invited him to return as an honorary chairman. The offer came with an apology, and an enormous sum. Ethan read it silently, then folded it carefully. Lena found him staring out the window, lost in thought. "They want you back?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "They're offering everything I once dreamed of." "And will you go?" He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. "No. Because everything I dreamed of is already here." He tore the letter in half, letting the pieces fall like feathers to the floor. And in that moment, it was clear. The empire he had lost no longer owned him. As the years drifted by, their love only deepened. They grew older, but the bond between them aged like fine wine, richer, more graceful, more tender. On their 10th anniversary, Ethan surprised Lena with something precious, a hand-carved wooden box. Inside, nestled among dried rose petals, was a small silver key. "What is this?" She laughed. "The key to my first office," he said softly. "I kept it all these years as a reminder of where I came from. But today it belongs to you. Because you unlocked the man I was meant to be." A tears welled in her eyes as she embraced him, whispering against his chest, "And you rebuilt me from pieces I thought were lost." But life, as gentle as it can be, still carries its shadows. One winter, Lena fell ill, a quiet sickness that came without warning. Ethan did everything he could, the best doctors, private care, sleepless nights at her bedside. Yet Lena remained calm, smiling even through pain. "Ethan," she said one night, her voice weak but steady, "don't look at this as an ending. Love like ours doesn't end. It simply changes form." He took her hand, trembling. "You can't leave me," he whispered. "I'm not leaving," she said softly. "I'm just going ahead, to make the next home ready for you." Those words broke him and healed him all at once. She passed away one snowy morning, as dawn painted the sky in hues of silver and blue. Ethan held her hand until the warmth faded, tears falling like rain onto her fingers. The house was silent that day, painfully, beautifully silent. But Lena's presence never left. Ethan continued her work, funding small hospitals and schools in her name. He turned their garden into a sanctuary for people in pain, a place where they could find peace, just as she had given him. And above the entrance, he carved a single line of words, "Built not from power but from love." Every visitor who came there felt her spirit, gentle, healing, endless. Years later, an old man sat by the lake, a cup of tea beside him, the reflection of stars in his weary eyes. Ethan Drake, once a billionaire, now just a soul at peace. He whispered into the wind, "Lena, I kept my promise. I built something that won't fall." And as the wind brushed his face, he smiled, because he could almost hear her laughter carried through the night. Moments later, he closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he felt her hand in his again. They were gone from the world, but their story lived on. People spoke of them not as a tragedy, but as a legend, of a man who traded gold for love, and in doing so became eternal. Their home became a symbol, a reminder that the greatest wealth is not measured in numbers, but in moments, not in what you own, but in who you love. And as the sun rose once more over the quiet lake, two names engraved on a marble bench shimmered softly in the golden light. In the end, this story is not about wealth, power, or status. It is about a man who learned that love is the only empire that never falls. Ethan Drake, the billionaire who once ruled the world from glass towers, discovered the truth that no amount of gold could buy: peace, belonging, and genuine connection. He built his empire on ambition, but he rebuilt his soul through Lena, a woman who had nothing yet carried within her everything the world had forgotten: kindness, courage, and purity. Lena's love stripped Ethan of his arrogance and clothed him in humility. She didn't just walk into his life, she rewrote his destiny. Where others saw wealth, she saw wounds. Where others bowed to his power, she spoke to his heart. And that was the difference. That was her magic. When Ethan lost her, he didn't return to the world of billionaires or to the hollow victories that once defined him. Instead, he honored her by living her values, by building hospitals, healing gardens, and sanctuaries where people could breathe, dream, and find peace. He realized that love is not something to possess, it's something to become. Ethan's final empire was not made of steel, but of souls healed through her memory. His name faded from corporate headlines, but it lived forever in whispers: the billionaire who gave everything away, and, in return, gained eternity. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all, that the measure of a man's success is not how high he climbs, but how deeply he loves. That the most powerful legacy is not built on fortune, but on forgiveness, faith, and the courage to feel. In the end, Ethan and Lena's love became timeless, a quiet melody that still lingers where the wind touches the lake and the roses bloom by their bench. Their empire may have fallen, but their story became immortal. Ethan and Lena Drake, two hearts, one legacy. Thank you for listening to this veiled narrative story. The billionaire who built an empire, but lost his heart to the woman who had nothing. A tale of power, surrender, and a love that outlived time.